The following is a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio. Want the real story behind the sound bites and headlines? Let's find the facts. Remember, it's not a conspiracy theory if it's the truth. You are not paranoid or confused. You just need to know.
Welcome, everybody. It's time for another edition of What You Need to Know. Kip Keefer on the Tony Kurre Radio Network, and we are. I'm trying to find the right words because this is an exciting time. A lot going on right now, and we certainly appreciated all the support and just the way you all have embraced and kind of followed this new program, Need to Know. And hoping that you're also on board for our newest member on Tony Kurre Radio as far as a program's concerned, as Wanna Bet debuted this past week. Kip Keefer, Case Keefer, produced and directed by Clayt Keefer, a real family affair, and it is a comprehensive look every week at the weekend coming up in football, primarily from a wagering perspective. My son, Case Keefer, has been in Las Vegas 13 years after coming out of the University of Kansas, and he quickly has risen to one of the most prominent experts in the country on sports handicapping, analysis, betting, a lot based on the interesting concept of analytics, which is basically interpretation of a lot of data and a lot of numbers. And I find it fascinating. And I think anybody who is interested in sports, because, analytics is not just part of sports handicapping and betting. It has become a huge tool used by just about every professional organization to assess talent, to analyze different trends of things they're incorporating into their system in terms of their on-field strategies and approaches to opponents. The whole field of using data and all the sophisticated ways to break down those numbers is really a subject that I think all sports fans can really get interested in. So I hope that you'll give it a listen on Wanna Bet. We also run it on local television, Channel 21 on Saturday mornings in Birmingham at 11:30 every week. And you can hear it right here and see it on the Tony Kurre Radio Network. And it's uploaded also to the iTunes station, Spotify, podcast locations. So very excited with Wanna Bet. And to make it a total Keefer family affair, we're running a promo. You can, if you're a Facebooker, you can get on our Wanna Bet page. We also have one, of course, for Need to Know, our program that is coming to you as we speak. So those are specialty pages that are up and running on Facebook. But we have a promo running starring my 2-year-old grandson, King Keefer. So this is truly the family affair of all time. And I can't tell you how gratifying it is to have such a quality show and be doing it with the people that I love the most. And, my sons, who are both awesome at what they do. So check it out. Wanna Bet is up and running now and will be available again this weekend right here on Tony Kurre Radio. I don't want to be a broken record on this show. I plan to do a lot of different things, but and for those of you too young to know what a broken record means, back in the day when we had to put a piece of vinyl on a turntable and put a needle on it to make it play, if you had a scratch or a nick in your record, it would kind of catch and just repeat over and over and over again. It was a broken record. So that became kind of a cliche, don't want to sound like a broken record and repeat the same things. But every week, and let's remember what this show is based on. We talk about it in the opening to the show every week. This show is based on facts. And what is a fact? A fact is an indisputably proven truth. That's the definition of a fact. Our president said in the campaign that we believe in truth, not in facts. Well, if it's not based on facts, it's not the truth. And what is considered the truth by a lot of these people now that are calling the shots and pulling the strings in our country is whatever they believe, and whatever fits their agenda correlates to being the truth. And that is not the case, not the definition of truth. It is indisputable fact. And every week, to support so much of what we've been telling you here, and again, if you've missed the previous episodes, I was a little bit redundant last week, but the main theme, without repeating the whole thing, is we're not in a position nowadays. It's not the 1800s. It's not the mid 1900s. It's not Republican versus Democrat. It's not man versus woman. It's not white versus black. It's not gay versus straight. We're all being played, folks. And I defined in the last couple of shows what the battle lines are. It is this elite group of leftist thinkers that believe that the biggest defect in this country is your right to individual liberty and freedom of choice. They truly believe, and it's thereby the truth, that they know better than you how to run your life and make every decision that you make for you, because they are more intellectually gifted, more societally privileged. They are the elite. They should be in charge. And that thought of just a large central organization, government, making the choices for their citizens and basically expecting their citizens to just live for the state and not for themselves and their families is the most flawed concept, proven time and time again by history to be an utter failure. But still, that mindset is prevalent even now with everything we know about what's happened in the course of history. So with that as the preface, there were some facts this week that came out that, again, support so much of that I have to harken back and bring you up to date with those points, those facts that really kind of make the argument. And it involves two guys on the West Coast, completely different from a life standpoint, but very similar in terms of their wealth and their influence and what exactly, is the role of these people in this situation I'm describing. The first is a gentleman by the name of Paul Pelosi. Pelosi, you say, is he have anything to do with the Speaker of the House, the representative from California, Nancy Pelosi, who has been in Congress for like 76 years? I think she goes all the way back to just after the Civil War with her political career. Yes, congratulations. Paul Pelosi is the husband, 82 years old, of Nancy Pelosi. Paul Pelosi was a big real estate developer in California. When he married Nancy Pelosi, and she began her political career first in San Francisco and then in Congress, the Pelosi family wealth has ballooned. I don't have the exact percentage figure, but it has quadrupled and more since the political involvement of the wife of the power couple, Nancy Pelosi. Paul Pelosi has made untold fortune in real estate development and different investments, including, I know this is going to come as a shock, in the stock market. Let me give you a little bit of an indication of what I'm talking about. Back in May, Paul Pelosi purchased a tremendous amount of stock in 3 or 4 different companies specializing in renewable energy. That was a prelude to all of a sudden this massive bill coming to fruition in recent days, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the most hilariously tragic name for any piece of legislation, title for anything ever conceived, because this is going to flood another $760 billion into a system that's already overrun with worthless currency. And I shouldn't say worthless, but currency that is devalued greatly with the introduction of even more currency. That's why when you go to the grocery store, that's why you're paying 3 times as much in some cases for a lot of the products that you routinely bought a year ago for a much more reasonable price. I personally went to the grocery store this weekend. I bought 4 items, nothing high ticket, a couple of packets of tuna, a loaf of bread, some Swiss cheese. I think I even splurged for a 6-pack of Diet Mountain Dews, plopped down my 4 items on the counter, and it was $32. And I didn't really think much of it until I was heading home. And I started calculating in my head, how can these items add up to that much money? And the only way was that they are literally double what they cost last year at this same time. So that's just a personal example, but I know all of you are living that every single day, in addition to pulling up to the gas pumps. And, they keep telling you now gas is going down. Well, yeah, but it's still $1.50 more than it was this time last year. And the fact that it is stabilized a little bit because demand is down, people can't afford to drive. A bad indicator today, diesel fuel is back over $5 a gallon, which is bad news for all of us that are already paying so much money, because as their fuel costs are rising, that means that the price increases have to be passed on to the consumers, because how do goods get to the market? How does the supply chain work? What fuels all of that? Diesel fuel. Anyway, I've gotten off on kind of a tangent. Paul Pelosi made that investment in renewable energy companies. About a month later, he comes back and invests millions of dollars in semiconductors. Now, those are better known as microchips, which run just about everything. And there's been this big fervor that we've got to get back to being competitive. Silicon Valley is being overrun by the Chinese semiconductor industry, where they're producing more of the world's microchips. So that was the justification for another $50 billion bill to beef up American production of microchips, which all sounds good. But a lot of those companies that are even American-based are still heavily invested in, and in some cases totally controlled by Chinese interests. The long and short of the story was Paul Pelosi bought millions of dollars of stock in American semiconductor and microchip companies. About 2 months later, if we follow the timeline, Nancy Pelosi confidently introduces, or somebody in the House introduced it, Nancy herself didn't, but Nancy confidently predicted that a bill recently introduced in the House to produce American production, to dramatically increase American production of semiconductors, has a good chance of passing in the House, and she hopes it will get through in the Senate. Well, that was quite the prediction, because just 2 weeks later, the bill was introduced in the House. It breezed through, got to the Senate, where it was supposed to, be a little bit contested in these times of excessive spending and runaway inflation, but passed the Senate, signed into law by Joe Biden. What a nice coincidence. A killing for Paul Pelosi in the stock market, coming off his big win in the renewable energy area, another industry that's pretty much completely controlled by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party. So to illustrate the point, the elites are benefiting big time with their positions. Now, that's a political example. We already know that in any regime that is bent on power and control, and we talked about that last week, power and control equals incomprehensible wealth, and incomprehensible wealth ensures the continuation of power and control. They are two self-fulfilling dual prophecies that go hand in hand. But to make that work, you have to have strong enforcement and ruthless almost, things that you can call on to make sure that everything is going well in terms of enforcing all of the policies that a massive federal government in total control has to enforce. And this week's example is about as shocking as any that you could ever hear. Mark Zuckerberg, you know who he is. He's the CEO and founder of Facebook, which has been phenomenally successful. We don't need to go into all the origins of that. Zuckerberg was at Harvard, and a couple of twin brothers came up with an idea to have a social media deal where everybody in Harvard, all the student body and other people were connected. Zuckerberg basically stole their idea, ran with it, turned it into not only a little colloquial situation, but a worldwide mega company based on that concept that is known as Facebook. And I have certainly been on Facebook because I find a lot of the advantages of communication and being in touch with a lot of people and promoting various activities. It's a very useful tool. Do I like the politics? No. Do I like the fact that Mark Zuckerberg spent over $400 million supporting ultra progressive candidates all around the country, not only in national elections, but in local elections around the country? And we'll get into why that's significant in just a moment. But Mark Zuckerberg, basically in an interview this week, said that in the summer of 2020, before the presidential election, the FBI came to the Facebook corporate offices, some agents from the FBI sat down with him and other executives and explained that, they were so concerned with 2016, how the Russians had dabbled and interfered in our election, and that they had very, very reliable information that there was going to be a big dump of new misinformation coming from the Russians in the very near future to try to affect the 2020 election, and to be very leery of anything that came out, because it was more than likely Russian disinformation. Zuckerberg reported that himself, and about a month later, the story broke in the New York Post and other places that the FBI was in possession of a laptop computer from Hunter Biden that was left at a repair shop in Delaware and never picked up. The shop owner had turned it over to the authorities. The New York Post had gotten some copies of what was on that computer. You know the rest of that story, but you really didn't know it in 2020 because the FBI had already been active, going to the news media, going to Twitter, going to Facebook, and warning those entities that this was disinformation. Do not take this seriously. Do not report on it. Twitter went even further than Facebook. Twitter banned any mention of that and suspended people if you had the audacity to write that there was a laptop from Hunter Biden that basically implicated the entire Biden family, particularly himself, and showed all kinds of nefarious activities. It contained correspondence with all kinds of business partners and made constant references to, quote, the big guy. The big guy, of course, his father, Joe Biden, who was vice president during a lot of the time that laptop material was in effect, and about how the big guy has to get 10%, and pictures of meetings with business associates, golf outings with Joe Biden, James Biden, his brother, Hunter, and of other associated business contacts, business used lightly. But basically, they were peddling Joe Biden's influence on the world stage, including a flight that Hunter Biden, and this is absolute fact, it is verified, indisputable truth. Hunter Biden was on a flight to China with his father, the vice president, Joe Biden. And in that on that trip, Hunter Biden negotiated with the Central Bank of China, which is controlled completely by the CCP, a $1.5 billion investment in his investment firm that he was partners with two other kind of nefarious characters, including, and this, you can't make this stuff up, one of his partners in that venture, the financial investment firm, despite the fact that he had no training, no experience, was not even authorized to be a financial consultant or investment person. One of his partners was the son of Whitey Bulger. Now, if you don't remember who Whitey Bulger was, he was probably the most notorious, most infamous gangster in the history of the Northeast, of Boston. He pretty much ran the city from behind the scenes. Great movie about that, that Jack Nicholson starred as Whitey Bulger. Bottom line is that was one of his partners, not Whitey himself, but Whitey's son in that investment firm. But he went on Air Force Two, your tax dollars, with his father and negotiated a deal. And then why would the government of China give a guy that had been discharged from the American military for drug abuse, who had all kinds of personal scandals, why would they hand over $1.5 billion to a guy like that? Well, maybe it was because, I'm sure this had nothing to do with it, but maybe it was because his father was the vice president of the United States. So the FBI, before all of this hit, had gone around and warned all the news outlets, do not run this story, suppress it, kill it, don't let it run. When the New York Post tried to post information on their Twitter account, they were shut down and banned. 55 former intelligence officers from various agencies, including 5 directors, issued a document that was publicly circulated to all the news outlets and released to the public that said the Hunter Biden computer story is Russian disinformation and should be disregarded. Now, we talk about election interference from Russians and, whoever else, white supremacists, and this is the most blatant election interference in the history of the world. They were terrified that if this information got out and was digested by the public, that it would turn the tide against Joe Biden and put Donald Trump back in for a second term, which they absolutely could not accept, because Donald Trump is the complete nightmare for everything they're trying to accomplish of building this massive, controlling federal central government. And all the agencies, all the bureaus, all the departments in the government have been so infiltrated and politicized with people that are only on board, not because they have sterling credentials in law enforcement or whatever the specific field of those agencies and departments and bureaus are, but because they are on board ideologically and politically with having this massive controlling central government, which we have talked about at length. So no less than Mark Zuckerberg, who's just a primary example of a leftist activist, comes out and says the FBI came to him and said, do not allow that information. Now, Facebook did not directly ban the information, but I can remember on some of my posts, at the bottom, there was a big red exaggeration mark. And it basically, said a little message where this is unverified information and could be disinformation, blah, blah, blah. And with the algorithms that Facebook uses to control who sees your posts, I think it's pretty safe to say if I post a picture of my grandson, I get about 200 likes. If I post anything that begins to get into areas of politics or some of the things we're discussing here, I seem to get no attention on those posts whatsoever. And I suspect it's because they're really not ever seen. So controlling information, having enforcement to make sure that everything stays on the up and up in terms of what they want to accomplish. It's all components of what we've seen in history in nations that have imposed this kind of approach. And everybody needs to be aware of it. I'm not trying to change your mind. I'm not trying to influence how you think about things. But be aware, folks, that this movement is going on. And again, no matter what you look like, no matter what you believe, no matter what you aspire to, you are just like me and everybody else that's not an Ivy League elitist that believes that they know best. You are being played every day. And I think I came up with the absolute perfect analogy for that last week on the show when I talked about the Republican Party and their representation in this process. It's just like the Harlem Globetrotters playing the Washington Nationals. They're all part of the same production, but and the Washington Nationals, just like the Republicans, they make an occasional basket just to make it look good. But at the end of the day, the Globetrotters / elitist government controllers always win. And that's the way it's set up, and that's the way it is. I want to wrap this up on a high note. A story that I heard this week that I thought was really inspiring, and I hope you feel the same way. You know, I'm a big horse racing fan, and Saturday up in upstate New York at Saratoga, where I just was able to visit a couple weeks ago, it was wonderful. They ran all their big races for the year, including the Travers, which is their Midsummer Derby, won by Epicenter, which was fitting because he had run second in both the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness. So he had his moment in the sun. He finally proved he's the best 3-year-old. But earlier in the day, there was another stakes race featuring a superstar sprinter named Jackie's Warrior, who is one of the best horses we've seen in a number of years. He is just a superstar. He was 1-9, which is the lowest odds you can possibly be. It was a foregone conclusion that Jackie's Warrior was going to win again, like he always does. And he was upset in that race, right at the wire, caught by a horse by the name of Cody's Wish. And I learned the story behind Cody's Wish, and it's really amazing. Keeneland Racecourse in Lexington, Kentucky, has a Make-A-Wish Day every year where they have families with children that are diseased and sick and being treated for all kinds of terrible, mostly cancers, but some other forms of terrible diseases, come out for a day at the races, and it's a big thing. One of the side trips on that morning before the races was a trip to one of the big breeding farms. And if you've ever driven through Lexington, the country is so breathtakingly beautiful. The rolling green hills, the white fences of the big horse farms, the horses running around in the fields. It is simply an aesthetic delight to go to Lexington. But they went to this farm, and they had some foals, some young horses that had recently been born who were just up and around and kind of romping around, and they went out to interact with this group of families and kids. And there was one horse, and these at less than a year old, these horses are precocious. They're constantly on the move. They don't sit around and do nothing. They're just full of themselves, kicking and running and having a kind of a good time. And this particular horse, when Cody was wheeled out in his wheelchair, he was 12 years old at the time. He's got a terrible genetic disease. It's called something like Wolf Hirschborough, I'm not sure, syndrome. But he's been treated and operated on so many times. It's just the worst. I can't think of anything more heartbreaking than a child undergoing all of that terrible stress and pain, and that's just the worst card that could possibly be dealt. But anyway, they wheeled him out there in his wheelchair with everybody else, and this colt came over and kind of looked at him for a long time and walked up slowly, to everybody's amazement, and physically laid his head in this child's lap. And it was just this sense, I guess, from this animal that just had the instinct to comfort this young man and give him such a thrill. And of course, they already had another name picked out for the horse, but they named him Cody's Wish. Very appropriate with everything that happened. Well, guess what? Cody's Wish now has run 10 times, has won 7 races, and got on the national stage big time on Saturday by upsetting the great Jackie's Warrior. And Cody Dorman got so much publicity and mention. It has to be such a thrill for that young man. And to me, it's the feel-good story of the week. So on that high note, I'm going to wrap it up because I thought you needed to know that in this crazy world, there's still some real heartwarming, wonderful things going on. I'm Kip Keefer. Thanks again for all the folks at Tony Kurre Radio. Love being with you all every week. We'll be back next week for more Need to Know.
This has been a special presentation of Tony Kurre Radio.